Uh, Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Randy Bock. I'm here with the erudite and eloquent, interesting um, uh, ex-friend of mine. Now, when I say an ex-friend, he's not actually his current friend, but he's on X. So always leads to confusion.
Sounded the other way at first.
Yeah, Theo Jordan. And Theo, tell us a little about what's been going on with you. What are your what's top of mind, and what kind of leads you to lend your voice to the general public debate out there?
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon, Dr. Bock. Thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. You know, as we were getting ready to set up here, I was kind of thinking in my head how different it feels this time preparing to speak with you, because last time you and I spoke, I don't think we knew each other very well. I think we had both read some of each other's posts or maybe works, but I'm not sure we had ever directly interacted. And although I think it's only been 3 or 4 months, and this may sound corny to some people, but you actually feel like a friend now instead of an account on X, and that's pretty cool. So it was ironic you led off with ex-friend. So, you know, I won't tell a long story because I think you and I touched on it last time we talked, but I truly had a firelight in 2020 that I almost can't describe. And I think it was described best by a sign I saw a father holding at a protest, a freedom protest back during lockdowns, that said I had to be able to tell my kids I did something. And I had a similar fire just light of you really media interpretation. Like, what are we being told versus what is reality? And the gap there was so intense across every front. And if you think about it, not to get long-winded already, but one of the reasons you saw a lot of lawyers at the front of particularly COVID pushback, but also in this woke capture pushback, is we're trained to analyze fact patterns and try and push out all the noise and figure out where the evidence, where the preponderance of the evidence is going to fall. And it's like every single topic in 2020 I looked at, there was this massive gap between what we're being told and what's actually occurring on the ground. And more importantly, there didn't seem to be anybody there to help plug that gap, or put differently, those that were being silenced and suppressed while the narrative was just being run. So fast forward 4 years, and honestly, that energy has never turned off. I'm driven every single day with thoughts that I want to share to what I now refer to as the digital family, because there's really this community that is built that is spitballing all these issues. And maybe we'll get into it later, but this is actually the first week now where I'm trying to do this content and media more full time, just so that I can do it at a higher level. I can put out more, but more importantly, I can pursue these topics and give them the amount of time that they deserve and that I'd like to. You know, I'm doing this all on the side, impromptu at night and as a hobby, and on my phone at stoplights. And it's not a very tenable posture for the long term.
Well, no, it's interesting you say that. You know, I'm actually doing this from my home, but I have a employment outside the home. I'm working not quite full time right now, but I'm working at a medical office, and I have the, I guess I don't know where it is right here, but the MD thing is for mentally deficient or modularly dysmorphic or medical doctor, one of those things. I can't remember. Been so long ago.
Man of determination.
Oh, thank you. I like that. But it's one of those things. I'm not sure if it's Rabbi Hillel who said, if not you, who? If not now, when? You know, you have to do what you have to do. You know, I've always had kind of this sense that you have to say what you have to say. I'll give you two quick anecdotes. One I was thinking of just very recently, because I have one of my nieces with us, and she knew my mother, but she never met her mother. So my grandmother, when I was young, before I even knew what this meant, she said, I'll just say the way she said it, with poop maybe, but basically, don't let them shit on your face. Open your mouth.
I like this lady already.
And when she said that the first time, I was just horrified. I was like, all I could think of was the poop, you know, going down my face, and I had no idea what she meant by that. Open your mouth. Why would you want to open your mouth to? I didn't really understand.
It flows both ways.
Metaphor. But once I did, and you know, I'd heard her say it a few more times. I got old, and 10, 11, 12, whatever. You know, it became a very funny thing, and that kind of stuck with me. And there's another instant when I was going to be bar mitzvahed. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's kind of one of these seminal moments um, uh, in my life, I think. Uh, Probably not yours, but anyway, so the rabbi, for the very first year, asked the 13-year-olds to come up with something that would be pertinent. We gave a little speech, aside from having to read from the Torah and all that kind of stuff, doing all the kind of the rote stuff that everybody did year by year by year. We wanted us to kind of have a unique flag. And so I wrote something on the topic of bar mitzvah, and I thought, why age 13? And I wasn't really fully knowledgeable. I think I know more now than I did then. I'm not sure I would write the same thing, but I said, well, look, it was from a society that was kind of a agrarian society, and boys became men, in their teens. People married 14, 13, whatever, 15. You hit puberty, you marry. You don't go to college, you don't go to high school, all that kind of stuff. And so either I said, I'm not really looking forward to 5 more years of Hebrew school and whatnot, but either, you should make it at a later age that's kind of culturally appropriate, like 16, get a driver's permit, a learner's permit, or 18, at the time, you could drink, 21 was voting, or I forget, whatever the ages were at that time, where we have the actual trappings of manhood, or you give us some responsibility at 13, more than, what we do now, which we go right back to, quote unquote, middle school or whatever, and get on our bikes and whatever, so either one or the other. And the rabbi heard this, and he was sitting in the audience. We were just doing a trial run. And he was sitting in the audience, and he just got up and started screaming at me, get off the stage. And he ripped up my speech and said, go write something else, or you're not getting bar mitzvah. I was impressionable. And so I didn't cry then, but when I got home, I was kind of, a little whimpery, whatever. My dad heard about it. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, what is there to do? I have to rewrite it. He said, well, he was a lawyer, he was an attorney, and maybe a little bit like you. And he kind of said, well, there are other things, and you can not get bar mitzvah. You could go to the synagogue, get another rabbi, whatever. So, well, how can we do this? We're kind of weeks away. And we said, well, we'll see. So anyway, so he said, do you want to give the speech? Do you care about this? I'm like, well, I just think it's the right thing to say. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he didn't argue with me. He didn't tell me why I was wrong. He just ripped it up. And that's just kind of like made me, whenever the answer shut up, I just, from that, so my dad kind of stood up for me, and he said, well, if you believe it, I believe it. I said, I don't necessarily agree with it, but it's your words, your thoughts, you go with it. And, and frankly, it was kind of ironic and I kind of an identity function, because that was kind of a forming of manhood. Oddly enough, that was kind of the genuine bar mitzvah for me. So we found another rabbi. Lo and behold, that rabbi wound up being kind of a greater friend, and he actually married us, me and my wife, years later.
Did you give the speech?
I gave the speech. Yes, I gave the speech at that synagogue, but it was a different rabbi came in, and the other rabbi boycotted it. And I got to say, it didn't get a uniform positive thing. Some of the kind of more, let's say, more traditional people, came up and said it was a horrible thing that I did, and that it was a really, it was a stain on the whole service and all that kind of stuff. Other people said, well, that you made me think, whatever. I'm not saying what the reviews were, good or bad. I was 13 years old, but that was the basic essence of the speech. And it wasn't long. It was like a page and a half, 2 pages. But I just think, the fact that I feel like it would be letting my father down any time thereafter if you don't say what it is until you can hear the argument. Once I heard some of the argument, frankly, I've heard different arguments since then about what the bar mitzvah is. All well and good. But if the first guy has spent the time to educate me on the topic, I might have written something different or whatever. I'm not saying I was fully correct, but the concept was that shut up is not the answer.
Absolutely. And you opened your mouth in both the unpleasant and the empowering way, right? You're absolutely right. It's you're not allowed to analyze this. You must obey me in thought that really pushes minds like yours and I's away. I had a lot of trouble with authority issues growing up as a teen because I had that mentality. And I wonder, because they do kind of tie together, don't they? I mean, the acceleration or the end point of this mentality, if you don't bridle it to some extent, is like the anarchist. And I don't consider myself an anarchist, but I struggled with authority. And that was largely because in a lot of authority apparatuses, there isn't any room for discourse or pushback. You know, I grew up on military bases. My father was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And one of his favorite reasons for anything was because I said so. And that's obviously a relic of him being a lieutenant colonel in the Army, because there it is what he said and you don't get to push back. But oh my God, that type of analytical framework drove me insane, which is why I didn't go in the Army. By the way, I wouldn't have made it. And again, I really struggled with, I got in a lot of trouble with law enforcement as a teen, partially because of that, and teachers and admins at school. And I guess I learned how to control or govern that to some extent, but I'm glad that I have that as my default way of thinking, because now accelerate 2 decades plus and the world is an Orwell novel. Everything's upside down. 2 + 2 = 5. And the authority themselves almost uniformly are deceiving us. And if you were one of the individuals, not to speak down to people, but who grew up the other way of like, we must trust the experts and march behind them because they have our best interests in line, I think you're in a very precarious place in modern society. And on the flip side of that coin, I think what we're touching on here, this energy is worth its weight in gold now. I think it's going to be one of the most valuable, identifiable, and valuable skill sets moving forward, is the ability to logically analyze and then the willingness to say it in the face of heat. And I don't think a lot of people possess those 2 skills.
Yeah. No, it's a funny thing. I think people have it. It's almost like a muscle. You know, I forget which cartoon it was, but I think it was Kliban, Kliban, who did some incredible cartooning. People should look him up. B. Kliban. I forget what the B was for, but he had some guy standing there. He had anti-gravity muscles. So his anti-gravity muscles, when they were relaxed, he started flying up in the air. That's kind of the opposite. But I think people have this. They just don't use that muscle enough. So they wind up kind of flying away when they don't use their anti-gravity muscles. So you need to have the ability to withstand some of the things that are going to blow you away. And you know, one of my favorite things is Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, and The Wizard of Oz in general, which I think is one of the great parables. But she got blown away. She got blown away to a different world, and things are different there. And there's kind of different set of rules. You know, the creatures she wound up cavorting with and carrying on with and careening around with were the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Lion. And they had deficiencies. They worked with her, and they didn't know they were on a quest. I think she framed it. She needed something. She needed to get back home. And long story short, is that the wizard eventually confronts him, but he's not a wizard. But he gives them a little bit what my father gave me. You know, I didn't realize I had the strength, but it's kind of this, and I think it actually happens in religion. I know we're going to try to at one point circle in Father Naugel, but these words are what is the magic. You know, the Wizard of Oz, you know, points out to the cowardly lion that he had been brave. You know, that he was looking for bravery, but in his own actions he had bravery, and the bequeathment of the word. You know, in the beginning, there's the word, there's logos, and the fact that we can speak and the fact that we communicate is the basic differentiation between us and other species, including other primates and whatnot. I'm sure, you know, people talk about whales' language and dolphins and whatnot, but the fact of the matter is that there's nothing constructive coming out of it. You know, there's a little bit of maybe beck and call that other animals have, and crickets and all the birds, whatever. They're all kind of chirping away at each other, but it's much more of like a pinging kind of thing. We have this thing where we can actually affect lives remotely. Obviously, that's the intent of a videocast or a podcast, or whatever. But this concept of words being withheld, words being used, you know, you can bring life to somebody with the proper intention. I just one little.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is that the definition of the term logos? I realize I've heard that a million times, and I'm not sure I know exactly what it means. Is the energy you just described, is that fairly represented by the term logos, or is that only about language?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I have my wife's a classic scholar. I'm not going to draw her up here, but that's something we can pursue. As Jen Psaki always said, we'll circle back to that. But you know, my understanding is logos means word, and so when we have the psychology logos. That's the, what all these things that are logi afterward. Psychology, sociology. That is essentially putting the words to those concepts. So you have psycho and the mind, not the movie, the mind, or not the mentally deficient,
not the knife. Yeah.
But the concept is you're going to put words to it. Well, putting words to it is just not enough. It's the logic. The logic comes from the same concept. So putting words around something is how we get logic. And it's interesting. Elon Musk, had said, "Oh, one of his tweets I think today or yesterday. So, logic." He was talking about a certain event circle that people kind of avoid using logic. But logic and logos, the word is there. So having words is one thing, but they can be screaming words, they can be condemning words, they can be cackling words. But oddly enough, by the intent of the ologies, psychology, sociology, whatever, biology, so forth, the intent is to bring words to them, and through the drawing out of the words and the confronting words with each other, you have a debate. And so,
my God, you just described all of the social sciences.
Comes step by step by step. So just having the word, but getting back to my kind of primordial point here is that we are brought into awareness by logos. I treated narcotic addicts for about a decade as an ancillary part of my primary care practice, and what's the difference between the narcotic addict and regular other people who are not doing that kind of self-destructive? I mean, I don't know the answer, but my kind of first pass at this is that my just talking with them is they didn't have that at home. They didn't have that guy like my dad. No, they didn't have my dad, he was mine, but they didn't have that guy like that who kind of suffused them with the word. There's the God giving Adam life in the Sistine Chapel, Da Vinci, and there's the brush. There's kind of that finger pointing down, the finger matching, and it's like that. That's what suffuses Adam with life. But really, it's the word. It's the bringing to language, and his discussing, with Eve, not what not to do, and Adam and Eve probably sussing things out in the garden themselves, and beyond. Cain and Abel, arguing. These lead to great fights. They lead to great accommodations. But the narcotic addicts, I think that what they were missing, they have arms and legs and ears and whatever. They're formidable people in many, many ways, and they can be crafty and clever. But what they're missing is that sense of who they were, and that kind of nurturing aspect that is the Adam and Eve, the God to Adam moment. And again, most came from fractured households in one way or another, where they didn't get kind of the eye to eye, the eye to eye, the kind of deep caring that not just nurturing in the womb, nurturing in people's arms, but that nurturing of who you are and acknowledgement. And that's kind of what people want and need over time. You could cure narcotic addiction, I think, when people have relationships, when they have somebody to discuss, when they can go to a minister, a priest, and get communion, get confession.
If you don't mind, I've got to pause you there. Do you mind if I pause you there and add something on top of all of that? Are you familiar with my past at all in terms of addiction? Have you ever heard me write about it? Have you ever read my writings? Wow, fascinating. So let me share a bit about my story and think of how well this lies on top of what you just laid out. Now, I recognize we'll dance on some awkward lines there because in essence, you were saying the void here, the gap is sort of a fracturing at home or a lack of at home, but I'll go somewhere with this. And I think it's very powerful. I was kind of smirking as you were speaking because of how much it resonated with me. So assuming it's single variable driven addiction, right? Which we're going to do just here hypothetically, because I think this is a fascinating point. Assuming it's single variable driven to what you just described, and that why do some people fall so deeply, so hard into addiction versus others who do not? And you were in essence saying it largely roots back to a lack or a void at home, but more importantly, you talked about the touching of the fingers, right? Which brought some spirituality into it. Interestingly, I was a full-blown alcoholic for well over a decade. It might have been closer to 2 decades. I've written a lot about that on X. And if anyone's interested in reading my writings there, search my name or my post with the word cigarette in it. And you'll find a post that says, driving by a liquor store at 8:59 a.m., watching an old man with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, waiting for the ABC store to open, was one of the saddest sights I've ever seen. And then underneath that, I just went and listed 3 threads that I've written about my journey, my long journey with alcoholism. And I plan on one day with this new doing content more full time, really fleshing that project out, because I think the fact that I got away from it, it'll be 6 years in November since I had a drop, could really help some people the way I got there mentally. And anyhow, I mean, I almost threw everything that was important in my life down a bottle. I'm talking my wife, I'm talking my kids, I'm talking just so much stability and fortunate hand I was dealt. I was at a point of what's called covert alcoholism, covert drinking, where you only want the people around you to know you had 4 or 5 drinks, because they even think that's pretty heavy drinking, but you need to have 10 or 12. So where do you have the other 8? In bathrooms, hotel bottles in your pocket, gallon of vodka in the garage you slug when you go get your kid juice. It's a sad, sad place to be. And I was there. And another forum, I'll share the journey of how I got there and how I got out. But back to your story. I, growing up, was dealt a royal flush when it came to strength of the home. I had a mother and father who just could not have been better parents. They were both from parents who remained together and were good parents. My wife ultimately has come from a family where her parents stayed together and were good parents. My parents loved me. I had some of the most strict rules of all of my friends because my dad was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. So I was getting the discipline, but I was also getting the love. They raised me right. They're friends of mine now to this day. I mean, I could gloat about my parents here for the next hour. In terms of the hand of cards I was dealt with at home, it was damn near perfect, Dr. Bock. And yet I succumbed to those very deep depths of addiction. And the reason that I'm bringing this up on top of your story is there was one element that I did not have in my childhood growing up, and that was spirituality, faith, and religion. Interestingly, my parents both came from religious or quasi-religious families, largely kind of pushed upon them. And in the classic pendulum rocking back and forth setup, they decided they're not going to do that to their children. They're going to let their children make their own choices. And let's use the word a lot of people don't like using, but I wrote a piece on my Substack with the title, indoctrinate their children with religious views. So I was not indoctrinated with religious views growing up. I remember all my friends would go to CCD. It was a school on Wednesday, and they'd go learn about God. I didn't. I stayed home, and I saw them when they got back. So I have grown up an atheist or a non-believer. I'm willing to more embrace the term agnostic, both to please others and because I'm on a mental journey. But I have never had religion and spirituality in my life, even though I'm extremely close to the church now and have darn near become a salesman for the church online because of this chessboard I see back and forth. So I guess my point in sharing the story with you is I wonder how true what you just said may be, and that I'm not a screaming example of it, because I had everything right at home, but the one thing I didn't have was the 2 fingers that touched. And I wouldn't want my parents to feel bad if they were listening to this, which they may well. They're one of few who have linked Theo with the real guy, because they raised me incredibly, and I'm glad I was allowed to make my own decisions. I'm very proud of who I am today. I think this process made me the strong person I am mentally today. But go back to the hypothetical single variable driving analysis. If that is true, then perhaps the 2 fingers not touching are ultimately the same equation, right? It's worth chewing on. And I'm willing to chew on that at 45 years old with the life I've walked and the people I've now gotten to know, like you, who speak messages that I really understand, and yet you've walked a different path in life. So it was interesting. Your story really hit me.
Well, thank you. So I don't have an answer, but I do have a question. So just to kind of carry on, what was the motivation? What was the turning point for you? And how do you say maintain? And is it something that you worry about? And how do you what's your kind of guidance system currently?
Yes, sir. So that was the last page of that story I meant to share. So one of those 3 threads that I shared under that cigarette post on X is a story about the moment when I knew I would never drink again. It was a singular moment. And I wish I could recall what you just said 5 minutes ago, but you talked about these people who had fallen down in this dark place, largely because they didn't have the proper foundation, the roots, whatever. The fingers hadn't touched, right? And I was explaining to you that I had the foundation and the roots, but the fingers never touched. And then you said something about sort of I forget how you phrase it, but like almost a traumatic event of sorts that gets people to sort of remake themselves. And that's where the fortitude comes from. Mine was my children. My daughter was born into a world of an alcoholic father. And That word bothers people, alcoholic, because we think of drunks who like beat people or pass out in their own vomit on the floor. That's not what the term alcoholic means. That's a special kind of drunk. An alcoholic means somebody who can't go a day without drinking. The actual term is can't not drink when you don't want to, or can't control the amount of drinking when you do. If you fail either one of those tests, you are a form of alcoholic. Then there's just a whole spectrum of how bad things are. So I was a very high level, high functioning alcoholic in that you wouldn't have known it in my physical appearance other than the smell, because I was always drinking. You wouldn't have known it in my career and my success. I was running my own law firm. I was married. I have a nice house. I had kids. So I was high functioning. My daughter was born into that. I think I was a great dad, by the way. And my wife and I went through some strife, and I don't think she'd ever take away from me being a great dad. She'd knock down the quality of great husband I felt I was at the time, which I'd probably be willing to side with her on now. But anyhow, I don't think I was ever not a great dad, but I'm going somewhere with this. Alcohol was omnipresent. And two things happened that were wake-up calls for me. The first one was my daddy's little girl, my angel. It changed my whole life. And when you have kids, everything just changes dramatically. Your lens on everything in life. She drew a picture. She used to draw these little lizard creatures, and they were so adorable. I want to make a cartoon book out of them one day. She would do it every single day. It's like they were cartoon lizard families. And one day she drew a house that had a family portrait. And she would later say it was us. It was our family. And sitting at the dinner table were three little lizards. It was mommy, daddy lizard, and her lizard. And daddy lizard had a glass of red wine in its hand. And I was huge into wine. And that bothered me very deeply that she associated daddy with wine, alcohol, right? This story gets much worse. So fast forward when her brother is born. So she's now 5. She's never known dad without alcohol by the age of 5. I don't think she associated dad with being a drunk because I went so out of my way to be a great and present father. But boy, the smell or the imagery of the drinking would have just always been around her, the only world she knew. So baby brother's born. We're over at my parents' house, and she's about 5 years old, and he's an infant, and somebody's holding him in the kitchen. And I go to grab, this was right around the time incident occurred that led to me deciding now was the moment. It was do or die for me. I'm like 2 weeks into the process, and I go to crack a non-alcoholic beverage, a Sprite or something. Baby's being held like 10 feet away from me. Daughter's in the kitchen, families around. A lot of people were in the room, importantly. I crack open a Sprite, and the sound makes baby jump. You can imagine that. Psst, from real close. Baby jumps and starts to cry. Man, without like it processing in the brain, knee jerk shoots out my 5-year-old daughter's mouth. Oh, don't worry, brother. Daddy drinks a lot, so you'll be hearing that. It was like a pile of bricks that hit me in the head. She said it out loud. She said it to everybody. She didn't take the time to contemplate it as a joke. It was her subconscious speaking. Again, this is all she knew, brother. So I go home that night, and I'm putting my son to sleep. And I don't want to retell the story because I'll cry like I did when I wrote the thread. But there was a moment I had where I stared my son in the face. He obviously had no idea what I was saying because he was like 6 months old. But in a dark room with nobody listening, I said out loud to that kid, I'd never have a drink again. And I can promise you, Dr. Bock, I never will. So in a way, it was my own tragedy. And thankfully, it didn't come with the consequences. I was at the point of tragedy. I was staring at the face, and it hadn't consumed my life yet. And I cried to a level I've never cried before or since at that moment. No. And honestly, I don't struggle with alcohol at all anymore. My voice cracks when I talk about it because there's a lot of emotion there, but there's nothing you could do to get me to drink again. So in a weird way, I had the rebirth from the fire, right? I had that traumatic experience, and I got real lucky that I'm standing here in the position I am to tell you about it.
Well, that's incredible. I have to say that telling my story about the bar mitzvah and my dad, I had similar, feelings. And it's like it's an amazing thing. Again, logos. These are words. They're just words you repeat, but they.
Sorry for my bad habits, but after that story,
they track to parts of our brain where these memories are stored. Now, there are thousands, I don't know, millions of things that happen to you in your life. You don't keep the same, record album or CD. Or USB drive in your head of each and every one of those. There's some that you use more frequently, and they have connotations. And it's an amazing thing because you look at a brain, it's like a piece of flesh. And where are all those things? If you look at your USB drive or even your computer, you see everything filed away. But these things are different. They're amorphous, and some things get worked over more. So that story, I haven't told the bar mitzvah story in some time. but it's there. It's probably not going to go away.
Yeah. I've been pulling out a lot of memories from like 5 to 7 lately for some reason. When I say pull out, I don't mean to. Like something comes back really vividly. It's interesting that they're pulling back from that far away.
That's a funny thing. How old are your kids now?
5 and 11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's a funny thing. I mean, when you're talking about the alcohol part, I never had an issue with drugs or alcohol. Frankly, I'm the only guy in my medical school class who went through without any caffeine. I drank here and there, parties and whatnot, but I'm still probably the only medical doctor you're going to find who went through the whole thing, residency and everything, without coffee, tea, Coca-Cola, whatever, no caffeine. So it's not,
this wannabe sommelier became a coffee addict, so my addictive personality will find another manifestation.
Well, I do think that people have that. I think people have, quirks. I'm certainly not without them. I mean, when I was a kid, I had some little quirk, but I had to cough, and I would think about it. Well, I haven't coughed for a while, then I would cough. So I know there are little tricks and quirks that everybody has, these little obsessive things and touchstones and whatnot. But I got to say, as far as the drinking goes, it's not like I drank much, but a beer, a couple beers, whatever at night. When the kids were young, they wanted the attention, and if I noticed that I was having the beer or whatever at dinner, 1 or 2, something like that, I would be more tired afterwards in order to deal with them. And they had the energy, the interest, and they want to tell you stories and all this kind of stuff, getting back to the word. And I just stopped doing that because it's like, I needed to be, after a whole, full day of work, I would come home, I'd be tired, I would kick back, have a beer, whatever. And then it wouldn't be kind of like fair to them, it's not so wonderful to think that it was the essence of their life, but I felt like I was depriving them of whatever maximal I could do for that, couple hours when, I was home.
Correct.
And so I just stopped, I mean, I might have a drink, maybe a couple times a month, 2 or 3 times a month here and there. But, it's kind of like a nice thing, having the kids, kind of change your life. I think this is something, that I'd like to write an article about, oddly enough, the food pyramid, and all the kind of public health adventures forays we've been through. You actually talk about writing for anti-racism, whatever is good public health, but wearing a mask or staying at home and all other ventures is also good public health. So public health is kind of a mutable and movable feast. But speaking of movable feast, there's I grew up with variant of the food pyramid. Now they're trying to change it. But the point I'm making about the food pyramid is the actual determinants of health have nothing to do. I mean, maybe something to do with the foods you choose. But the actual, if public health really cared about public health, they would be telling people to get married. They'd be telling people to have kids. They'd be
great line.
To go to church, because the actual much larger determinants of longevity and mind you, happiness during your life, quantity, not quality of life, not just quantity, is these things that we do that are engaging, that captivate the mind, that make you stop drinking, that make you drink less, that make you stop doing drugs. I had a lot of my narcotic patients come through, and a lot of them were kind of long-term methadone people coming to me to kind of taper off. I was doing a 4-month kind of, unfortunately, relatively unique tapering program of 4 months to get off. And they told me stories of being on methadone clinics and pregnant, and methadone clinics told them not to get off methadone. Well, I go, what about the baby? Isn't the baby going to be on methadone? And yeah, but they'll get over in a few weeks, a few days, whatever. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to use that moment, and no pun intended, seminal moment. I mean, pregnancy essentially begins with a seminal moment. But they wanted to use that just as you used your moment of talking to the baby to get better. And we all have this. We all know what better is. We all have it within us. And it's a struggle, not just for the outside world, it's a struggle to do that thing that we don't want to do. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to, go to work again. I can't believe I have to get this paper ready. I don't want to.
Correct.
And
Correct.
so people,
you've got to walk the walk.
Yeah, but it's like, again, a genuine food pyramid would not be a food pyramid. It would be a commitment pyramid. And like the things you do, and during my kind of drug treatment phase, when I was treating other people's drugs, not my own, I actually made a short movie, and I I don't remember the name, but the subtitle could have been Porno versus the Prom. And which one is the more genuine likely satisfaction? If you want to think of life in orgasmic units, which one of those things, porno or the prom, is more likely to give you an orgasm? Which is a genuine pleasure in life. It's kind of what narcotic addicts initially at least get. They get that kind of endorphin rush.
Sure, heroin addicts talk about that all the time.
It's like an orgasm. And so the concept I put in, which is kind of based on the kind of maturity scale, is if you really want an orgasm, the best and easiest way to do it is watch some pornography, go into a room, blah, blah, blah. But then there's the prom. So if you're a teenager, you're 15, 17 years, whatever the age of the prom is, 16, if you want to get that orgasmic pleasure, well, porno is so much easier. It's so available, so readily there at hand, no pun intended. and the prom takes a lot of work. It'd be months. You have to find somebody, ask somebody, blah, blah, blah. And you may not get an orgasm even after the prom. And maybe not, may never happen, may not, whatever. But that is basically the template by which we go through life. We either do the porno or we do the prom. So we either say kind of solipsistic, solo, and do our own thing. Getting back to this food pyramid thing, if there are things that you can do that are more prom-like, where you go to church, where you do commitments, where you join an organization, where you become the treasurer or the secretary of a group, or you join the board of the golf club, tennis club, whatever. You put some effort into something and people acknowledge you and they need you. That is apparently the thing that breeds life, that gives us long lives, gives us quality of life. And so, it's not like you can just kind of go to the kid's store and pick up a kid, go to the marriage store, pick up a marriage and whatnot. But if the public health people really looked at even the numbers that are right there in front of them, they would be a little bit, less concerned about which grain you pick and how many hamburgers you have in a month, and be much more trying to get people to
live their life.
Well, not just live their life, but, A, not trans themselves, B, kind of keep the apparatus intact so you can have the literally productive and reproductive lives you can.
Right. Chase the prom instead of the porno. It's interesting because what you described is being accelerated by our digital era and social media. As you were talking about, I think that prom versus porno is such a really important analysis to do, because the most central aspect to it isn't the fact pattern we're talking about. It's the idea of immediate pleasure that ultimately isn't satisfying at all, even though it meets the definition of it, versus a very difficult, similar pleasure you have to chase that you may never get to. And what I was thinking of as you were describing that, and what I meant by it's being accelerated by the digital era, was, man, I remember growing up as a kid, as a boy, 80% of life, upwards of 100 at times, at certain runs through puberty, was about chasing girls. That's what we did. Friday night, you got dropped off at the mall by your mom and dad. They picked you up at 9:30 or whatever, and you were going to walk around the mall. You didn't go there to buy clothes and sneakers. You went there to find the cute girls. You'd hope they'd look at you. You'd flirt, whatever. One day, one of them became your girlfriend, right? There was a lot of effort that was put into that. You didn't get to home base very quickly. In fact, that's why we created the base system. You would talk about this stuff. You would brag about this stuff. You would chase that shit for a year before you'd ever taste the final fruit, right? Right. Now go to the social media era, and I graduated out of this meat market before this ever came to be. But think of those swiping apps that were simply for sex. It's the exact same analysis between the prom and the porno, only now the prom is a real girl or a real boy who actually cares about you and wanted to have sex with you because there was something there more than just the raw and naked exterior, versus two people who can't find that because their life is hollow and shallow, and they're just swiping because they need to get that porno rush really quickly. And sadly, those apps sadly depends on your perspective, right? But ultimately, those apps connected those nodes and began satisfying that in the real world at like a societal level. And man, that's horrifying, because I remember when I lost my virginity, and I won't get into those details on your show, but that was like with my high school girlfriend, right? And a lot had gone into that moment. And then even in college, sure, I had some one night stands, but there was always a courtship process. There was those exciting energies you had to chase. Even if it was someone you hooked up with at a party on Halloween at a bar, there was still that catching eyes across the bar, getting to know each other, all that. Fast forward that all to just this boiled down, cold and calculated, hey, you look hot online, so let's meet and have sex. you're really talking about that same problem. And you're right, Dr. Bock. This is us as a culture getting away from the very building blocks of humanity itself. And if that's something being driven by public health, we've got even bigger problems than I write about. Drop mic.
Yeah, it's hard.
We may not want to go in too many of those directions. I left some, dangerous caves out there in that ramble, but
yeah, no, there's a lot there.
there was a lot there. Maybe we'll move on. But no, you make a really important point, and it's going back to the idea of get away from the fact patterns. It's going back to the idea of immediate gratitude, the pursuit of immediate gratitude that in many ways tickles many of the same pleasures.
I'm just going to correct you slightly. It's gratification.
Gratification, gratitude, right? Thankfulness.
I like that.
Right.
That would be
you do want to be thankful. Yeah,
that would be a great title for a book.
Yeah. Now,
Sure.
let me throw one last layer on top, and then give me your thoughts back on all of this. I did a recording on my unscripted project on Substack called Happy Poverty. And it's a silly title. And very quickly, what it was about was I was living in Miami at the time, and I was seeing opulent wealth, which I had never seen before. I had come from wealth, but not the level of South Beach and Boca Raton wealth. I went on a cruise, going to show the world I came from, to Costa Rica, and we went on an excursion that had like an hour and a half bus ride. Long story short, we drove through a part of the countryside in Costa Rica that had no sewage, no power, nothing. And there was this row of about 12 homes, shack-like homes, but they were built similar, like they had helped each other out. And what I noticed in that drive, as I'm just staring out the window watching this all scroll by, was happiness radiating from these yards. They were intergenerational families. The women were cooking. The grandmas were doing clotheslines. The dad were smoking something. The kids were playing. There was all these happy energies in these grasses. Then I fly back to Miami, where they have the opposite on the other side of the spectrum. They have 150-foot yachts docked outside with 10 people who are about to say, "Can I do anything for you, Mr. Smith," as you walk on the boat. And yet Mr. Smith is in the lobby having a cocktail by himself with a frown permanently embedded on his face. Is that not largely driven by the same porno versus prom problem, just stretched out wide outside of sexual gratification? I think it is, right? It's reflective of how quickly our society has changed. And I guess to tie it back to the food pyramid, our own government, our systems, our institutions, instead of helping us with these massive issues, seem to be pushing us away from them.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to underline your immediate gratitude, kind of, malaprop, misspeak. But immediate gratitude would be a great way to get away from immediate gratification. So the gratitude part is when you feel gratification is when you want something right away for yourself. Gratitude is when you are happy towards others for having been given things already that you have. So it's not so much a pursuit. I was listening to the comedian Jimmy Carr, to whom I listened quite a bit on, for better or for worse. I like him for the most part. Very, very funny guy, and he crafts his jokes. But he has he's pursuing this kind of the Jordan Peterson pathway, where he does inspirational things off the side, which are not funny. And he's talking about, I'm sure he's not the first person to mention this, but it's not the pursuit of happiness. It's the happiness in the pursuit. I'm not sure I got it right, but basically, the kind of gratification part is in the pathway, is in the yearning, the getting. I noticed this with my dog, whom I only keep is for experimental purposes. I'm just kidding. Or he keeps
You're
me
a true
out.
scientist at heart.
I'm the one who picks up his. Speaking of tourism from earlier, I'm the one who picks up his business, and not vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So I work for him. But anyway, one of the things he's taught me is that he's happiest, at least spatially, from my observation, when he's about to get something. And that's the part that's so exciting. When you're coming home, he's so excited to see you. It wears off after a little bit, but most of it is, like the Carly Simon song. It's anticipation, and when you kind of get that thing, getting back to the big power boat, whatever. When you have that thing, there's obviously this concept of buyer's remorse. You have it. It didn't fill the gap in. They talk about kind of the middle-age crisis, the men's middle-age crisis, whatever you want to call it, where you have to buy the big car, the flashy car. And there's also like the, kind of the middle-age affair. You have to get this, whatever. People are looking for these ego-driven things, getting back to that kind of solipsism, porno, the prom thing. And it's a funny thing. You kind of, have to let go of stuff. You have to let go of your expectations. You have to keep fighting. I'm getting at that reverse tender age of retirement and whatnot. I don't really want to retire. I don't want to retire from thoughts. I want to retire from concepts and whatnot, because what you have at the latter parts of life is experience and knowledge, and there's kind of a deficiency that young people can lift things up much quicker and better than I, and they're faster and so forth. But they don't have perspective, and so the people who can give that back, if you kind of help with the Job Corps. A friend of mine who's retired. He's doing a lot of fun stuff. He's sailing and whatnot, but he goes into the city and helps young kids kind of do their taxes and learn how to become CPAs and whatnot for free. And it's like, this is, quote Simba in The Lion King, whatever, this is a circle of life. And getting that sense of completion of who you are. The odd thing is that, if you talk about like sex lives and whatnot, and the things you can get and whatnot, young, you can get, nicer, prettier, more kind of fun in the bed young girls. But apparently the happiest people in life are in their 70s, demographically in the United States, from what I understand, with their marriage, with their sex lives, with everything, are people, in later stages. Doesn't make any sense. I mean, the machine parts don't work as well, but they have kind of this deeper satisfaction, which is kind of getting back to the eye contact, the logos, the word, because they presumably are having, relationship with people who know and understand them to a certain extent. And you have a framing of your histories matching up. And, that's kind of like base comfort. I don't think my dog would be that happy if he had to go. I know he's not. As a matter of fact, when we go away, we leave him for relatives, my son, my other son, kind of caretakers, our goddaughter's mom, whatever. But when we come back, after whatever, 5 days a week or whatever, he's kind of got that zoned out look, like, oh my God, PTSD was so bad. And these are people who know him, So I'm just saying, as far as his dating scene, if he had a sequence of different owners, one owner, a dog who just kind of traded owners every few nights or whatever, versus a dog who knows you and knows your routine, that there's like a greater, deeper happiness. Again, getting back to the food pyramid thing, which if people who actually cared about health as part of public health would really be encouraging. It's firm relationships. It's not, learning about, the things they teach in sex ed are mechanical. They're not emotive. They're not foundational. They're not again, productive. And mind you, nor are they reproductive for the most part either. So it's an interesting thing. We kind of try to mechanize so many things, but we're losing kind of the kind of that canine human relationship part, which would easily transmit to human relations.
Yeah, very well summarized. You kind of tied all of that together. You made a comment there that you said it doesn't make a lot of sense that people are happier in these, let's call it like the twilight phase or the golden phase, the golden era at the end than they are in their, or, I think satisfied might even be a better word, than they are in their youth, when their bodies look better and they're at their sexual prime. And you would think, like, logically, it should be the other way around. Aren't you at your happiness when you're sort of firing on all cylinders there as a youth? But what jumped out at me there, Dr. Bock, is it only doesn't make sense because of the setting or the context or the framework that we're analyzing it in. And let's go back to like the food pyramid, and what is our society, our institutions, where are they ultimately like pushing our populace? The reality is lust is very different from love. I wrote a piece on Substack called What is Love? And it drills into this idea that lust is that swiping on the phone, right? Love is something that sits together on a couch decades later. And the reality is the greater satisfaction in life is that pursuit of love. It is those eras 70 years down the road when you and wife or you and husband sit there together and you look back and look at everything you created, everything you overcame, this castle that you built together. You can't find that on a one-night stand. But going back to the why does it not make logical sense? Well, the reason it doesn't make logical sense is, what logical arena are we analyzing this in? the materialist world that we live in, where everything's about how hot Hollywood is, how good girls can look, how nice guys have gotten their bodies in shape in, how good someone's face looks, how nice their clothes are, how good of a car they drive. All music talks about is look at my bling, look at my looks, look at all these people who adore me. Everything is so plastic and artificial. No one's talking about the intergenerational families raising the kids and cooking on the clothesline like in Costa Rica, right? So I guess my point is, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. We would think we'd be killing it in this prime of 20 and 30 years old, because our whole damn society, pardon my French, is now prioritizing and elevating this notion of arrested development, that the most successful people in America are the Kardashian family. No, they're not. I don't think the Kardashians have achieved anything of substantive worth, not anything that I'm interested in. They might have fashion lines and stuff. So if you want to get some money, maybe that's where you're about. But going back to happy poverty, is it money we're chasing here? So kind of tying that all together, I think what you and I are dancing around here are the driving engines of why our society is off track. And I guess the next phase in this discourse is we need to figure out where is it coming from and how do we reverse them? Because it seems so obvious to me. And I recognize that's my own arrogance at that point, because I'm now speaking like my way is the right way. But I don't think I'm speaking words of extremism to you here, Dr. Bock. No. And yet that's what they're painted as.
No. So we're rounding out the hour, and before we do so, I just want to give you one. Is a really extraneous thought, but it's a recent thought. People. It's about timeshares.
Nice. I love your mind. Tell me about timeshares.
So this is a funny thing. I own a timeshare week. I own a deeded week in Aruba, and that I never purchased really. My nurse, maybe 15, 20 years ago, bought one, but kind of on a little bit of a whim. And she hadn't loved it, but she realized over time she wouldn't be able to afford flying back and forth, whatever, or accommodating it. And so she is kind of pre-internet stuff, and she wanted to sell it. I had no interest in it. And eventually she said, look, just pay the maintenance, you can have it. And so I've done that since then, and I own it now. And people make fun of timeshares relentlessly. And I understand, there's the hard sell. I got to say, so cut to the chase. I was in our timeshare, and it's in Aruba, and it's in the summer. So it's kind of a funny thing because summertime's wonderful here, but we're right on the beach, beautiful beach. There's not even any rocks, pebbles. It's just gorgeous, clear water. Anyway, it's a wonderful place. Hot days, a little bit too hot perhaps, but every day's clear day. Blah blah blah. But I have to say, I don't know why this visit. Because I've been to been to other places, fair amount. And I've only been to this Aruba place like 5 times in the maybe 20 years. But I have to say, I noticed something very odd in particular about it. The timeshare is fully sold. So there's nobody selling anything. There's none of this hard sell stuff. But the people there were mostly, say, kind of nouveau riche, bourgeois people, who have roofing jobs and might be working as city clerks, not professors, not Mark Zuckerberg, not uber rich, whatnot. And this is the thing they own. And so what does it come down to? Well, all the people there had chosen this and they invested in it. And I got to tell you, it was the friendliest vacation I've ever had in my life. And my wife noticed the same thing, maybe to a lesser extent. But everyone was like uniformly cordial. You see in the hot tub and the pool, whatever, in the ocean, people are just chatty and they're just so much. Everyone was uniformly friendly. It was just, there were never any, I never heard any harsh word. People are drinking, whatnot, by the bar. So there's a fair amount of alcohol, like ambiance, whatnot. But I never heard a harsh word from anybody. And there were a lot of families there because they own it. They bring their families down, whatnot. It wasn't the most, I don't think I learned a lot, whatever, because it's a kind of a beach vacation, whatnot. But I have to say that it was just like everyone had a smile on their face all the time. And they look you in the eyes and whatnot when you're going down the hallway. And it's just, what didn't have that kind of namelessness that you have at, say, your, nicer hotels, perhaps, some, Paris Hilton, or no, that's a person, but it's also a hotel, whatnot, where you're kind of in a more urban environment and nobody knows each other. And so where I would circle back to this thing, I was reading a piece from Douglas Murray on Twitter, that there's kind of this high comfort, high he was talking about kind of the endless immigration, kind of swirling everything up where people don't know each other. He called it the high trust versus low trust societies. And so the timeshare place, and we're in the mid rises. It's like a 5-story building, but it's a huge, wide complex. I don't know how many people are there any given time, a couple, 1,000 or whatever. It's kind of a very high trust society, even though we don't know each other. Everyone's bought into the same concept. They literally have bought into it, both economically and mentally and whatnot, and by committing to it. And it's again, getting back to the same concept of marriage. They married the place, and they have a comfort level. And so it's a high trust society. When you have this kind of endless flux of people coming in, nobody knows each other, and there's kind of a namelessness. I mean, there's a word in French, anomie, A-N-O-M-I-E, which I used to think meant namelessness, which I've used it that. Turns out it has to do with the Greek word nomos for law, and it's kind of a lawlessness. But either way you look at it, this anomie word pertains to the way societies trend these days, where things are being kind of shoved down people's throats. My younger son is a digital nomad right now. He's in Ireland currently, just as of a couple days ago, and he hasn't really noticed the enormous immigration to Ireland because he's, on a certain kind of like social level there, dealing with people through computer interactions, what. But Ireland has 5 million people. It's taken in apparently 1 million people over the last 3 or 4 years from everywhere, and they're having the upheaval we see going on in England and whatnot. But it's not just the people. It's not just having more people. It's a matter of whether those people have an interest with you, whether they share anything with you. And this goes back to kind of the marriage and the concept of where happiness lies. I'm going to leave it there as maybe a topic to pick up elsewhere. I'm not against new people. I'm not against people coming in. I'm not against immigration per se. But everything has to kind of be managed to a certain extent of how you want it to happen, and have it happen more organically than have it kind of thrown at you.
Absolutely. Very well said. And I think what you described at the timeshare is obviously serves as a microcosm for something on a higher level. And sort of at the end there, you said, hey, I'm not trying to imply this or that or the other. That's one of the reasons we're stuck in this quicksand, is that everybody, I didn't mean this, I'm not pointing this at you, I mean in the greater public discourse, we're all afraid to offend because we've raised empathy and emotion so high in priority, right? But what you're describing, this notion of high trust and low trust society, which was represented in that timeshare, can be represented in the greater immigration story that you started to allude to. And we can have the same discussion without it being offensive, because it's not offensive in the timeshare. One thought to maybe lay on top, and we'll pick this up at the next time we chat, which hopefully we can, is you mentioned, by the way, you said, I was waiting for you to make the tie to a wealthier hotel. Because as you're telling me that story, and I've been to Aruba a few times, by the way, I love that island. I would love to be there at the same time as you. We'd have a cigar on the beach. Maybe we'll talk about that. But anyways, I'm sitting there picturing one of those resorts, and I have an idea which one of a few it may be. And I'm picturing the environment there, and the very chill, everybody kind of happy. And I was waiting for you to have a pause, and I was going to say, where you won't find that, Dr. Bock? At one of the high-end properties, like a Ritz-Carlton or something. And then you referenced that. But one thing you mentioned there, I took a note of it, is you said, like more of like an urban environment. And what's interesting is the difference there objectively is money. It's purely money based. We got the rich people at the Ritz. We got the commoners, the peons down at the Holiday Inn, right? So where I'm going with this is, and maybe we can flesh this out next time, how closely do those two lines track? What I mean is, I'd love to know the geographical distribution of the people in the Ritz-Carlton versus the people in the Holiday Inn. I'd like to know, do they track to big cities versus small towns or not? And how closely aligned is the money disparity between the two properties, and potentially a geographic or a cultural separation between the two properties? How much does one fuel the other, or vice versa? It's interesting to think about, because it is money, but it's not all about money. And ultimately, you're right. It is urban environment. The large urban environment is a low trust environment. The small town America is a very high trust environment. Doesn't mean one is right or wrong or better than the other. Fascinating discussion to pick back up on.
All right. So I'm going to have to terminate us, at least as far as video cast.
Yeah, that sounds cold.
And so we're going to remain ex-friends.
That's right. That's right.
On X, that is.
That's right.
And I hope people follow you on X at Theo
Thank
Jordan,
you.
but they will, if they're listening to this, they'll probably find us on Twitter, as it were, X, as far as my ex-friends go. And so you're at Theo _ TJ _ Jordan.
Yes, sir.
I'm at @ Dr. Randall Bock, as long as you spell Randall with 2 L's and Bock, B-O-C-K, Dr. or whatever. So we'll figure all that stuff out. People find us one way or another, and I recommend people follow your posts and your Substack and whatnot. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of today.
Thank you very much. It's truly an honor for me to get to pick your brain. I've looked up to you long before you knew who I was. So I look forward to doing this with you again. Thanks a lot for your time, Dr. Bock.
All right, lovely.